I'm Jessica Peresta, host of the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Hannah Roudebush, a training consultant and former ELA 8th grade teacher. Our focus is how educators can connect their ELA classes to their students' interests and lives. This is so much fun, and you're going to learn so much to think about. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, could you help out the podcast? That'd be so cool. And right now you're probably thinking, well, how could I help out the podcast, Steve? Well, I've got a couple ideas for you. One is you could tell a friend and share the links. And how about a second one? You could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And how about third? Click on the link on my website homepage where it says buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2, $5. What do you think? To help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so awesome. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Enjoy the show.
Teaching is a job with a lot of autonomy. Yes, there are standards to teach and tests to give and boxes to check. And it's really easy for us as teachers to get bogged down in those things. But I always viewed it as it was largely my choice how I wanted to teach those standards and how I wanted my day-to-day for myself and for my students to go. So if the day was boring, it was on me. I was the one that planned that day,
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Hannah Roudebush is a training consultant at Gale, part of Cengage Group, where she develops and delivers training to K-12 teachers and school media specialists, as well as special, government, and public library staff on a wide variety of digital resources supporting lifelong learning. She earned her BA in secondary education with an emphasis in social studies from Marshall University in 2012. She later went on to gain certification in English 5 through adult, as well as MAs in both instructional processes and strategies in school principalship. After teaching 8th grade for 10 years, Hannah joined the EdTech world as a training consultant. She has a passion for making learning fun and teaching in unconventional ways, while she's still making instruction both rigorous and relevant. Targeting different learning styles, fostering critical thinking skills, and getting participants engaged in the learning process are her educational passions. Our focus will be how educators can connect their ELA classes to their students' interests and lives. Hannah, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. I feel like I've spent most of my life in the world of education at this point, and I'm really excited to share with everyone how we can make the English language arts curriculum more relevant for our students.
Very cool. So before we go any further, tell us what you do as a consultant.
So as a training consultant at Gale, like you said, I work with a variety of different populations. But really at the core of what I do is demonstrate how to effectively learn and conduct research using our products while focusing on both equity and access. So when I'm working with K-12 customers, there's definitely an added focus on how school staff can supplement curriculum with different forms of engaging content. I also like to show what a great tool we provide for collaboration. So working cross-curricularly with your school librarian, with other teachers, with your media specialists, with instructional coaches, all of those different people that make up the K-12 world. But really the main goal is always the same. How do we engage learners? Whether we're talking about students or adult learners, that's really our focus.
Excellent. At one time, Hannah, you were an 8th grade ELA teacher for 10 years. What is something that you really liked about working with 8th graders?
8th graders are fun. Some people may disagree. I always say in the middle school world, you either love middle school or you hate middle school. There's no in between. But I found that they were not yet too cool for school, for the most part, at least. I found that I was able to be myself and infuse some fun into my classroom while also maintaining that expected level of rigor. So I think there's something special about that year before you go to high school too. It's such a formative year. And I always kind of viewed it as an opportunity to adjust the trajectory for some students. the ones who have always struggled, the ones who just don't really care for school. My favorite ones, the ones who declared that they hate reading, they didn't like to read, the ones who, were quiet and tended to slip through the cracks. Um, while of course we should be giving extra time and attention to those populations all the time, it's hard. Some school years, if you're rotating classes, you may have upwards of 100, 150 students. So I viewed the eighth grade as a chance to, give students some choice, some attention, and some respect, that could sometimes lead to a shift for them. Something simple that I would do to engage them in the eighth grade before they went on, was kind of give them, um, they're getting ready to go to secondary education at the high school level where things are so much more autonomous, and they're kind of on their own. So I wanted to kind of give them a taste of that with research projects and kind of inquiry-based model. So in the eighth grade, I would always let them choose their own topic for the research project so they could be kind of seen and heard, and those quiet kids could express something they were interested in that maybe they hadn't got to share before. And I always share that my first year doing this, I was a brand new teacher and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, okay, I'm going to discuss with each student their topic. Make sure it's a good topic and that it's something appropriate. And I had two young ladies who wanted to write. One wanted to write about piercings and one wanted to write about feet. And I tried to discourage them. I was like, ladies, I don't know if these are good topics, but they were passionate about it. And I said, okay, you can do it. And, the one student wrote about piercings as a form of medical treatment, the importance of piercings in different cultures. And it was truly fascinating because it was a topic she was interested in. She thrived. And in eighth grade, I found that their topics were often very interesting and very random and sometimes very weird. But it made it that much more fun. So I could set their expectations for learning and that level of rigor, but let them guide their own inquiry. So I think there's so many opportunities like that in eighth grade that it was my sweet spot. I liked it.
That's cool. That's very cool because you're talking to someone who I am the person who you talked about earlier in what you were saying, who I'm glad that there's somebody who wants to teach eighth graders. Because
you are not alone.
My favorite grade to teach, I was history teacher and they're 10th graders. They were
10th grade.
And 11th grade would be my second choice, and then third would be ninth, and last would be seniors. And I only say that because they really, especially in springtime, think everything's done, we're good. It's like, no, you got all this stuff you got to get done. And
they're over it. Very hard to engage at that point.
Yes, but 10th graders, just like some of the things you talked about, the 8th graders, is that they'll let you be goofy. They'll be goofy right along with you, or at least they'll pretend that they're being goofy right along with you or something like this, laugh at your jokes and, participate, though, in the activities that you create. That's why I was fascinated by what you're going to talk about today, because that's something that I had the good fortune of working with some great colleagues that's what we were all focused on, was trying to figure out how to make it engaging and some excitement happen and some things that would matter to them. So I think this is cool that we're going to go there. But thank you for teaching 8th grade because
you're welcome.
Appreciate it. So let's talk about this. And so this is really where it comes from too, which is you're kind of going to make me admit when I ask this question. So what is something that you learned from being a teacher that made a long-term impact on you?
So this one is so easy for me to answer because it's something I just do every day and that my 8th graders taught me, is to stay out of the rut of life. It will pull you in. And, my students would often ask me, Miss Roudebush, why did you decide to be a teacher? And my answer was always for the fame and fortune. But I'd quickly follow that up by saying, teaching is a job with a lot of autonomy. Yes, there are standards to teach and tests to give and boxes to check. And it's really easy for us as teachers to get bogged down in those things. But I always viewed it as it was largely my choice how I wanted to teach those standards and how I wanted my day-to-day for myself and for my students to go. So if the day was boring, it was on me. I was the one that planned that day, So I know when I was a very talkative and energetic 13-year-old, you may find that hard to believe, the last thing I wanted to do was sit at a desk all day. And as a very talkative and energetic 30 something, it's the last thing I want to do too. So I think it's really important to focus on how you can make your days exciting. And I have received and still have, I just moved and all of my my packing, I kept these letters from students that I had gotten over, my tenure teaching. And some of them expressing the long-term impact that that learning environment had on them, both on their education and their personal life. Students sharing that they felt like they could maybe finally be themselves, or they could come out of their shell, or the best compliment is that they decided to go into teaching themselves. My personal favorite was from a student who had to move away about three-quarters of the way through the year. And in eighth grade, one of the things you pretty much have to do is maintain a seating chart throughout the year, or chaos will ensue. And sometimes it was like solving the world's most difficult problem, finding a seating chart that would work. So I made a seating arrangement, and all of the kids were mad in this one group. They didn't want to sit next to each other because they didn't know each other. And I was like, you know what? Give me a week or two, test it out, stick with it, and maybe you'll find yourself pleased. And they loved it. They ended up getting so close to each other. They begged each other not to move. The week before this girl moved to her new school, they had a lunch together, just their group at their pod at their desks. And she wrote me a letter when she left, accompanied with a Dundie Award from the office for World's Best Teacher. And I still have it. It sits on my desk every day. But she
Nice.
wrote that it wasn't how I taught and how I made her feel. And that's not a personal thing from me. That's something that all teachers have the ability to do. You know what I mean? Such a powerful gift to make these kids feel special and let them explore themselves. It's something every single educator can do. So that's a long way of saying that that's something I've taken with my current role and just life generally. I decide how my day's going to go. I decide how those who interact with me are going to leave those interactions feeling, and finding ways to infuse fun and positivity, not get bogged down in the day to day. So that's probably the thing I'm most grateful for learning in the classroom.
That's so cool. That is really cool because that's a right now we need to be able to package that and sprinkle it across all the schools where there's any teacher that's going, oh, my day is bad. Oh, I gotta do this or I gotta do that because they've forgotten that. All right, what you're talking
Exactly.
about.
I always heard in my, teacher training prep that teachers were the best actors and actresses that ever lived. And it's so true because it's not fair to go to school and take out your bad day or if you're feeling bad on them. You know what I mean? So, and it kind of rubs off on you at a point. You find yourself, you fake it till you make it. You find yourself being upbeat for them. And the next thing you know, the bad things in life don't seem so bad. You're kind of just happy to be there. So I think
Nice.
it's important.
I think it is too. The only problem is though is that you find out that when you try and share your humor with people who are not 10th graders, let's use them as an example, you find out that adults go, why is that funny? I go, oh,
Exactly.
you missed the point, man. All right.
Story of my life. You just summed it up right there.
Nice, nice. All right. So our focus today is how educators can connect their ELA classes to their students' interest in lives. So why would a teacher want to know this?
Get that student buy-in. You know, all teachers have had an experience, every single one, where you make what you think is an engaging lesson and you are met with blank stares and disinterest. It's like the in-person version of a black screen on Zoom. You know what I mean? They are not there, they are not enjoying it. But we have also all experienced today where students are engaged. We see their lights coming on as they grasp what the concept of the lesson is. And in my experience, almost every single one of those moments came from when I was making my curriculum most relevant to my students. We all know like a good song, a good book, a good movie, whatever it is, has to hook you from the beginning or you're not going to be in it. We've all started books and not finished them because we just weren't, engaged from the very beginning. And I think lessons are exactly the same way. We need to, meet our students where they are if we want them to learn and thrive. Um, that can take the form of, lots of different things, but I always kind of tried to incorporate different mediums to keep them guessing, keep them interested, not do the same thing day in and day out. So things like primary sources, time period letters, diary entries, how juicy. You know what I mean? They love to read that stuff. And then to see how language has changed over time, view speeches people have written, pull in some different informational texts. There are things out there on so many different subjects, obscure parts of history and of science. That's one of the things I always liked about language is that, English language arts classroom, if we're reading, we're reading. You know what I mean? If we want to read about science or math or social studies or music or art, we have that option. Um, but also videos and podcasts. Students love to do stuff like that, just like this, Steve. You know what I mean? People listening to the podcast. You
Most
can do
definitely.
this with your students. There are podcasts on all kinds of different subjects. Um, so, but I think what happens is that sometimes teachers feel a little out of touch with their students. You know what I mean? That's easy to happen as adults, especially if you don't have kids of your own. It's, easy to feel like, what's current? What do I do? How do I connect with these kids? They're speaking a whole different language. And I've been out of the classroom for 2 years and I'm finding myself not quite understanding some of the words I'm seeing online. I'm getting to that point. But for teachers that may feel that way, I say talk to them. Students love to share their interests. You can even infuse those things into some bell ringers to get your class started. Maybe one day a week you say, share with me what you did this weekend, or share with me your favorite TV show right now, or your favorite movie, or what music are you listening to, or even do that as an exit ticket type activity so that you have that connection and you kind of get where they're coming from. And then just try different activities and see what sticks. Get their feedback, make adjustments to, meet them where they're at and get the most buy-in from them.
Love it. That is awesome. That is so cool. And that's fun too. When you connect with them through that sort of stuff. And, it's like, there's a relevancy there that they might not have recognized otherrise, nor wanted to recognize. And they may not tell you that, hey, I like this, until it's like 5 years later. But, that's a cool thing. And I think, all teachers want to know. You really want to figure out how to do this because it's one of the keys to it's kind of like the key to starting the car. It's
Exactly.
it's good stuff. I love that. All right, so I had read some things that you had talked about in different areas, and I had to make sure I went here. All right, so
Okay.
if you could make changes to what most English majors and training for English teachers focus on, what would you change?
Man, I think a big thing is focusing on those different instructional strategies. So often we talk about what we're going to teach and not how we're going to teach it. So I think we really need to focus on the how, the activities, the instructional strategies. These are things that took me years of experience and observation and my own research to really even begin to grasp. I mentioned earlier not getting bogged down in the routine of life and how important that is. And I think it's important that we talk about that in the curriculum and how we teach that curriculum. In making things relevant for our students, we have to figure out what works for them. And, I have students who 100% prefer sitting down in a quiet space with a piece of paper and a pencil answering their questions. And that is perfect. That is great for them. If that works for them, awesome. But I have students who are squirming in their seats and anxious to get up. So, those students would rather me take that worksheet they would have done sitting at their desk, cut it into strips of paper, tape it up and down the hallway. They take a clipboard, they go around, they're doing the exact same thing as the student who prefers that quiet environment, but they're getting to move a little bit. They're getting to walk down the hall. They're not stuck in that desk. You know what I mean? And, I'm seeing this with a lot of different activities, like literature circles are super cool and engaging, giving students some choice over what books they're reading. Choice boards, choice right there in the name. Project-based learning, escape room scavenger hunts. These are things I didn't learn in my formal teacher training. You know what I mean? So I think we need to shine a light on that variation and why it is so important. I wrote hundreds of lesson plans in college for my teacher prep. And I'm sure everyone out there can remember those 20-page lesson plan templates that no administrator of mine ever wanted. And I know why they're important. I know that you need to plan out, especially when you're starting and you're so green, plan out what you're going to do. And you need to over plan and you need to write all those things out to organize your thoughts. But the planning is important, but I would really like to see that focus more on how. And also making future teachers, aware of what resources that are available to them through their school district and through things like their state library and government entities. There are so many resources available. a lot of times for free for teachers to use that they just don't know about. So I think, teaching them and training them on those things is so important. And it's something that I think seasoned teachers tend to forget. You know what I mean? We're used to our toolkit, the things that we have available to us. So you see a new teacher come in and you don't think about, oh, I wonder if they know we have this resource through the state library that they could use, or I wonder if they know we have this. They probably don't. So I think doing that from the very beginning in that teacher prep can really save a lot of time and energy and money.
Yeah, that's so right on the money because it's, I think it's because it's easier to focus on things that are way more concrete, like plans, than the possibility that three of the kids really get this and two of them are in the back flirting with each other and not paying attention to whatever you're doing. And then the rest are kind of all over the place. And you got to bring that herd of cats in together and make an impact with them on what they're getting and what they're not getting. And I think sometimes in those classes, some of them probably got away from the classroom so they could avoid not having to engage the kids. I don't know. But I think that's so smart to talk about. Let's focus more on the how, because that's, boy, is that, because the plans are important. I've learned that some people just want to fly by the seat of their pants. And for some people, it might work okay for a while.
For a while. It catches up to you.
Yes. And then you find out that you forgot to teach them this, you forgot to teach them that. And now you've really done them a disservice. It's, I like to tell this story. I had this Algebra 2 teacher in high school, and he was a nice person. He was a nice man. He was well-meaning. And I probably would have learned a lot of Algebra 2 from him if it wasn't that some kids knew that if all you did was mention last week's football game, high school football game, he was a high school ref that was very popular in the state. And so he'd travel all over the place. And so, suddenly the whole class was gone because he's talking about whatever happened on the football field. And
derailed.
That came back to haunt me. I was excited, so I got caught up on my homework for some other class or something while he was doing that thing.
Yeah.
But that came to haunt me when I was in college in Calc too. So, it's like, nice. If I'd only paid
It's
more.
easy. And you always have those students who think they can do it. And you realize, and you go, no, not today. I see what you're doing.
Exactly. No.
No.
Gotta love that. So, but the how is so important because it's especially because the kids all come in different shapes and sizes and backgrounds and things like that. And so you're going to be challenged to say the least.
Yes.
Well, thanks for talking about that. All right. So what do you do to help teachers to inspire students to want to learn more? Where do you start?
Well, I think a big thing is just showing teachers that it doesn't have to be a huge time investment. I feel like we're always, we know teachers have no time. You know what I mean? They have that, they have prep that's full. And during your prep time, you're supposed to make your lesson plans, make your activities, grade the activities that you've given previously, check off all these standards, go to PLC meetings, all of the things that you have to do as an educator. So I think, just showing that it doesn't have to be a huge time investment and that a little bit of creativity and thinking outside of the box can really go a long way. And one of the things that I did, I like to share this story. It makes me sound absolutely goofy, but I had bought a sweater online that had a goose on it. And I thought it was so cool. And all of my friends made fun of this goose sweater. And they're like, what are you doing buying a sweater with a goose on it? So I mentioned it to my students and they were like, goose sweater. And I kind of teased the day that I was going to wear the goose sweater. They were all excited a countdown to the goose sweater day. And I thought, I can't just wear this sweater. That's going to be so lackluster. I have to build this up. We have to do something special that day. So I thought, okay, what can I do with geese? How can I do this? How can I make this a whole day? So I made this theme day. And we did stations that were all about geese. And I had my goose sweater. And I downloaded a font that had geese in the fonts. It was awesome. But we did station. So we did a gallery walk with all these different goose phrases, like idioms and metaphors that use the word goose. And they were up and down the hallway. So, one group of students was walking around answering these questions. And then one station, we read Aesop's fable about the goose that laid the golden egg. So then we did some math and some research. How much is gold worth today? How big is a goose egg? how much would that egg be worth if it was solid gold today? So we did some math and some research there. And then I actually learned something in prepping for this that geese, when they fly over mountains, they ride thermal updrafts like they're riding a roller coaster. They don't
Nice.
fly just directly over the mountains. They ride the slopes, right? So we read some informational text about that. And there was so much learning and critical thinking, and we were reading in, physics and math, both hard and soft skills. And one of the things I like is that students were seeing vocabulary in different settings and different content areas, which we know just builds stronger readers. And ultimately, I tried to meet them at their interest level. They were excited about the sweater. I amped it up. I made it a thing. And I overheard a student I didn't have in class ask, like, why are there goose things all over the hallway? What is this?
Nice.
To which one of my students replied, it's Goose Day. Duh, you don't do that in your class. And I think it was successful based off of how many students said, you should buy more weird animal sweaters. We should do
Nice.
this more often. But it was so much learning, and it was almost like it was concealed. Like we did so much and they didn't really realize it because it was just fun. We were reading and we were looking at different parts of speech and we were doing math, but they didn't realize it because it was Goose Day.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. You would have gotten along really great with a colleague of mine who he used to do this whole big section on poetry. We were teamed when we taught 10th grade in this school, and we brought up some middle school concepts to the high school in 9th and 10th grade. And so we were teamed and tried looping for a while also, where they go on that same team from 9th grade up to the team that's matched with them. And so you did different activities together, but he used to do this big section on poetry, and eventually it would culminate in the day that you had to, when you came into class, everything you spoke had to be in a certain sort of rhyme or whatever those those poetry terms are. And good grief, I invariably, he would either trick me into coming into his classroom, or I would forget and walk in there or something like this, and it's like, oh, this is terrible. Because
I gotta speak in a haiku.
yes, exactly. And I'm going, all right, let me think. I know cat and hat and sat rhyme together, but that doesn't work, does it? No. Yeah. And so then I
love that.
The class would teach me something that I could say to get out of there. But yeah, that's good stuff. I love it. It's awesome. But by the way, what's really cool about what you're talking about is when kids start being proud of like those things, like you're talking about the goose stuff. What's really cool about that is that means they're talking about it outside of your class, your team, whatever that environment is. They're talking about it at lunch. They're talking about it at different places. And the other kids are going, yeah, the goose lady, don't you?
Yeah.
that's awesome. That means you've built up some credit on that credit card, man. I like that.
That's it. And their younger siblings would come up and say, are we going to have Goose Day? Are we going to do these things that I've heard about? In previous years, it became a thing.
Very cool.
Had a reputation to uphold at that point.
That's awesome. That's exactly it. I like that. Good stuff. All right, so we've already kind of started touching around this, talking around this concept of, what type of activities do you share with teachers to encourage engagement? What do you like to teach them how to do?
So, I've already mentioned a few, and I think there are just tons of different activities and materials to encourage this engagement that we keep talking about. One that I've already mentioned, but I really like, is podcasts. And there's such a wide variety exploring, different subjects. And we know that students can, listen and understand something on a higher content level than if they were to read it. So you can incorporate some higher level things by using a podcast. And, some are stories similar to like an audiobook, but often voiced by different people for different characters, which makes it engaging to listen to. But my students really resonated with like mystery and true crime. So of course you need to be mindful of the content and appropriateness of your source materials and preview it beforehand before you just dive in and do something with students. You need to listen first. But in my class, we listened to a podcast that at the time was one of the most popular ever made. And, we kept notes as we were listening to it. It was true crime. And we made a crime board on the bulletin board with the red yarn and the pictures and everything. And, we discussed as a class, and there was some heated discussion and debate in my class on the subject, some of which, bled over to the lunchroom. And I was told more than once by the administrator, your students were arguing again in the cafeteria about your content in class. But we kept up with the case in the news because it was ongoing, and they were truly engaged, and we were, practicing, important writing, speaking and listening skills. And, a few months ago, I actually ran into a former student at Panera Bread. She was working the cash register at Panera, and she said, "Oh my goodness, did you see the case? Yeah, he was let free." And she'd kept up with it. She's a college student in her second year now at college. But she'd kept up with it in the news, this case
Nice.
that we had talked about, 6 years previously in the eighth grade. And that just made my whole day. And I was with a friend and she was like, wow, she really remembered that from eighth grade. I can't remember anything from eighth grade. And I was like, that's the goal. And one year I even had my students try to record their own podcast, which you know how much goes into that. There is a
Yes.
lot that goes into that.
Yes,
And we
yes,
had
yes.
very basic rudimentary tools to do this, but they loved it because I had them do one episode, and exploring almost like that inquiry-based research paper where they explore a topic they're interested in and just talk about it. So they love that. Another thing that I think really resonates with students is to choose novels that are of interest to them. Okay, now this is something that a lot of English teachers go into. They're like, I love reading. I want to teach English. I want to read books with kids, right? And that's such an exciting part of the job. But you get those kids who, like I said, I don't like to read. You'll get that response. I don't like to read. And I'm a firm believer that they just haven't found the right thing to read yet. So I like to pair them with informational texts to make them a little bit more relevant. About half of the reading standards under the English language arts umbrella are informational texts. So I like to find different ways to pair them with novels and do standalone as well. So every year I read one of the most traditional novels for eighth graders, which takes place in the 1960s. The 1960s were a wild time. So I like to really provide some historical context for that. What were teenagers going through at that time? We would listen to music from the Beatles and Elvis and the Who. We would talk about the civil rights movement, different wars and protests, and just so much turmoil during that time, and kind of compare it to their generation, the things that they're growing up with, things that kind of transcend time, and, connect these things that were happening in the 60s with these teenagers to their current life. And that was always one of the most successful things. The kids who just really hadn't found a book that they liked to read, that was the one. I always started the year with it because it started it on a high note. Almost every single kid enjoyed that book, and I had them hooked for the whole year. You know what I mean? Start off strong. After that was research.
Love it.
I lost a little bit there, lost a little bit of cred there. But that ability to connect with them. And my last couple years teaching, I purchased a new class-wide set of books. I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but Phineas Gage, a gruesome but true story about brain science. Are you familiar with this?
No, not.
So it's a story about a man who in 1948 suffered a brain injury from a railroad accident. He was working on a railroad and a tamping rod from an explosion went through his head. It says a gruesome story about, brain science, but in that story, the kids absolutely loved it. It was an entire book of informational text. It was just chock full of science and medical history. And we learned about the brain and medical science and how it's changed a lot since 1848. We're not balancing our four humors anymore. And we talked about phrenology, which is where the bumps and lumps on your head really determine different personality traits. So we would, do that, kind of feel around on our heads and determine, our different personality traits based on a very outdated science. But they were totally engaged and interested. It was something weird, which I already said eighth graders tend to gravitate towards and like. So those are just some of the things, some of the examples of activities I did that, weren't super time consuming, didn't take me a long time to plan or gather materials, but had the students interested just because I made it a little bit, more relevant than just here's a book, we're going to read this, here's some questions that go along with it.
Nice. I like that. I like that a lot because, yeah, the other one goes, oh, good. Yeah, here we go. Here's the book, and now we're going to get the questions, and they're never going to give us the answers. They're never going to tell us to do the questions.
They're never going to tell us.
Yeah, exactly. This is fun. Yeah, and instead we got Goose Day and all kinds.
Right?
I like that. Awesome. All right. So let's do a little bit of, what if sorts of things. Okay.
Okay.
So what if you're doing some training and you're talking with them about all this high engagement type stuff and excitement and good feelings that it generates, and the idea is that we're going to have fun, and someone says to you, Hannah, yeah, but I'm not you. I can't do this. What are you going to say to them?
Of course you can. Now, maybe you don't buy a goose sweater, or maybe you don't decide to teach with tiny hands on, which is how I once decided to spice up a lesson on gerunds, participles, and infinitives. But students need to see different teaching styles, different, personalities, so that they see themselves reflected in education. Not every student had the same personality as me, but they had teachers throughout the day who had different personalities. And I think it's super important that, students see their personalities reflected in different classrooms. So no, not everyone has to be, this kind of caricature that I made of myself in the classroom sometimes. But I would say, if you're feeling kind of reluctant to try some of these things, lean on your fellow teachers. Use all of those resources that are made available to you, and just try new things. You know what I mean? I said earlier, we've all had that lesson that was just a flop. It didn't take off. And, there's going to be times that happens. Something that you spend time doing is just not going to work. And that's okay, because you can just try again. You can try new things. That's that autonomy that you have as a teacher in your classroom. If you want to find out what really works for your students, if you're struggling to connect with them, like I said before, talk to them. See what they like, what they're interested in, how they learn, lessons that have resonated with them in the past that maybe other teachers have done. What's a lesson that you remember? What's an activity that was memorable to you? And kind of sort through those answers and see. And if you're struggling, check out podcasts like this one with you, Steve.
I like
Professional development books. There's a ton of those. Education journals, magazines, and blogs. I was once told in teacher prep that being a beginning teacher especially was learning how to beg, borrow, and steal. And with technology available, there isn't a reason to constantly reinvent the wheel. See what others are doing, and I guarantee it's going to spark you some inspiration of how you can customize that based on your personality and your teaching style.
Love it. Great answer. Great, great suggestions too. All right. And so that's going to take me to the next teacher. All right. Because, maybe in another training session you run into this. But Hannah, they don't want to know this stuff.
I would say maybe they just don't want to know this stuff yet.
Ah.
Yeah, give them some choice. Experiment with different activities. If there's a standard you have to teach that is exceptionally hard to infuse with fun, because let's be honest, there just are. For me, that was always grammar. Give them an option to get up and move. Turn that activity into a worksheet, turn that worksheet rather into a scavenger hunt, a gallery walk, stations. Just add a little bit of movement. Sometimes can make it a little less boring. Turn reading into a close reading escape room activity. Students love those. I love making those. They're so much fun. Try literature circles, which I mentioned earlier, but those are essentially book clubs where students choose from different novels under an overarching theme. So maybe we're reading about dystopias. Then I will give my students several different dystopian novels to choose from. They're still learning the same thing. They can discuss it together as a class, share out what their novel is about. Give them some choice. Maybe students, some want to read in large print. Give them that option. There's so many different ways to mix it up. Learning is exciting. And grasping a new concept releases those endorphins and gets you excited to learn more. So I believe if we find a way to hook them, then we can get that buy-in. So they may not want to know this stuff, but maybe say they don't want to know this stuff yet, and find out how to get them.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. I love it. We're getting close to finishing up, Hannah. And
Yep.
Before we do that, can you tell our listeners where they can find more information, connect, and learn more?
Yeah, so I encourage you to reach out to your district and see what resources are made available to you, because there may be some things out there, some really awesome resources that you just don't know about. Check with your state library and other government entities like workforce development. They usually have resources that you can incorporate into your classroom. And of course, visit Gale.com to see how our resources can help supplement your instruction and engage students in research and writing across curricular areas, whether you're teaching English or social studies or science, and also discover how our equity and access can help you meet students where they are, because that's really, I think, the key to engagement, and where to start that engagement is meeting them where they're at.
Love it. All right, we got two more questions, and I got to ask you this. If a teacher gets the kids wanting to know more and they are engaged deeper with the content, what impact do you think this may have on a teacher's well-being?
Well, we all know teachers overwork, right? The average teacher works about 52 hours a week, and finding that work-life balance is very, very, very important. We see a lot of teacher burnout, and we want to avoid that so that our awesome teachers don't leave the field, right? I find many school districts are supporting their teachers more now with wellness programs and encouraging teachers to take advantage of those things. However, through exploration and experimenting with that autonomy that I've mentioned several times now, I think that's an opportunity to find your joy in teaching, to either find it or re-find it. You know what I mean? It's an easy thing to lose when you get bogged down in all the red tape, in all the things that you have to do, all the boxes that you have to check. So I say gravitate to what you enjoy. If it's pop culture, talk radio, art, silent reading, whatever it is that you enjoy, something that's not only fulfilling to you, but engaging to your students at the same time. If they see you interested in something, they're going to be interested in something. You know, I would make myself seem very energetic and excited about a positive phrases and English grammar. Not exactly the most riveting subject, but I'd get into it. And then the students would always come up and say, look, I did it. I wrote in a positive. So you get that kind of joy. You know what I mean? Sometimes just from infusing that joy into something that's not so joyous. And I think with all the resources and curriculum available, you can save time and often your own money, because we know teachers are spending money out of their own pockets a lot, by using what others have done and modifying it to fit your joy, right? Like I said, it may not be wearing a goose sweater, but maybe it's talking about something that's fascinating to you. And this is where having access to resources like Gale can help supplement and enhance your units and, you know, find things that your students know and love. If I were to leave listeners with one thing, because I think this is something very important, teacher well-being and teacher mental health, experiment, experiment, experiment. Try things, find what sticks, you know, find your joy, and I almost guarantee that it's going to rub off on your students. And if you have questions or you're feeling stuck, lean on your fellow teachers, or feel free to reach out to me. I would love that.
That is so awesome, and I will make sure that I have information in the show notes to so they can connect with you, which would be very cool.
Absolutely.
Makes it easier to do. So last question goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it, and what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Man, I had so many. You know, I really consider myself lucky to have had so many awesome teachers. I think that's why I ultimately went into education. But there's two, and for very different reasons. I want to mention both of them. The first was a teacher named Miss Farmer, and she taught 11th grade English, and we did a lot of the classics in that class, which, you know, I as an avid reader, I found some of those hard to read. You know what I mean? And we did a lot of writing, and I got a B, and I had never gotten a B in all of my years of school. And I went to her and I begged for extra credit and just expected that I would be given the extra credit, you know. That could win her over. I'd make her feel bad, pulling the heartstrings. And she stood by her guns and did not give me that extra credit and said, honey, are you going to college? And I said, yes, yes, ma'am, I am. And she said, well, you're going to get a B there. So I've softened the blow. It's not going to be so world shattering when you get your first B in college. And when I went to college and I got my first B, it wasn't that overwhelming thanks to Miss Farmer. And, you know, she was a teacher that everyone was kind of afraid of. You know what I mean? She was that stern English teacher. And me and a few of my friends ended up having lunch with her a couple times a week and really appreciated her and her teaching style after that. And the other was a teacher named Coach Lane, and he taught me so much about, you know, both athletically and academically, but he always gave a first day of school speech. And it was his expectations of what you were going to do in his class, and very high expectations. And he'd throw in some personal anecdotes, and I had him all 4 years of high school. In my senior year, I'm a TA for the class, and he said, "Well, you're up, Hannah." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "You're going to give the first day of school speech to this class." And it was a class of freshmen, and I was a senior, and I said, "Okay." And I gave him that first day of school speech that I'd heard so many times. And I think that I talked earlier about kind of changing the trajectory of a student's life. I think that was the moment where I thought, I like this. Maybe this is what I should do. Maybe I should do this. And so I got to say thank you to both of those, because they taught me, very different lessons, but important ones.
That's awesome. That is so cool. Hannah, thank you so much for talking with us and sharing about how educators can connect their ELA classes to their students' interests and lives. And I got to tell you that it also applies to everybody else who's teaching in classes. So it's cool stuff.
Absolutely.
Wishing you the best in all you do. Thanks so much for spending time with me.
Thank you so much, Steve. I had a blast talking to you, and I hope that everyone finds this useful, and hopefully I sparked some inspiration and interest.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.